I'm audible. Am I audible?
Yes, Rohan, you are.
Great, because I'm having some issues with my computer. So,
Okay.
welcome to our monthly series. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rohan Gupta. I facilitate the English self-help group for Eklavya Foundation, which meets every Wednesday, 7 to 8 p.m. For both caregivers and care seekers, so Shubhartis and Shubhankars. Every first Wednesday of the month, we have our special speaker series, as Manjari mentioned. And it is my privilege and honor to welcome today's speaker, Dr. Vijay Nagaswami, who is a renowned Chennai-based psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and author with over 40 years of experience specializing in couples therapy and relationship management. He's well known for his new Indian marriage series of books, which includes bestsellers like The 24/7 Marriage and The 50/50 Marriage. He's a prominent marriage counselor focusing on repairing and strengthening marital bonds using cognitive, behavioral, and emotionally focused techniques. He completed his MBBS from Madras Medical College in 1980 and subsequently undertook a postgraduate training in psychology. He has authored several books. We will post a link of all the books that he has written. And he has also used to write a popular column in the Hindu newspaper from 2008 to 2013 called The Shrinking Universe. So, without further ado, sorry. One last thing, as Manjari mentioned, please keep yourself on mute. I will be posting in the chat and monitoring any questions that come up during this session, which is about relationships and mental health and relationships, so vice versa. So again, without further ado, please welcome Dr. Vijay Nagaswami. Over to you, Doc.
Right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here today. Uh, I was very impressed hearing about Eklavya Foundation's work, and I'm happy to play a small role towards facilitating certain aspects of understanding the dynamics of relationships. Now, obviously, the relationship I'm going to speak about is marriage. And the reason for that is, as a nation, we are all obsessed with marriage. Either we are married, or we want to get married, or our parents are looking out for somebody to get us married to, or we're getting out of a marriage, or, you know, we can't find somebody to get married to. And right from childhood, parents are really thinking about how to get their children married, which is most unfortunate because marriage is not something that, that you can just kind of wander into, but it's now become just one stage of life. And in that stage, we think once we have, finished our education, got ourselves a job, then we need to settle down. And settling down implies we need to get married and have children. So I think that we don't really appreciate the role that marriage plays in our mental health, or mental well being, shall I say. And very often, people aren't really able to get it right. Now, I'm going to explore some of the reasons why people aren't getting it right and what can be done to make that better. But before that, let's just look at the kind of impact that relationships have in our marriages, in our lives, on our mental health. Our entire well being is presupposed on the foundation that, you know, we have a healthy work environment, a healthy home environment, and our relationships are meaningful and complete. Now, when we don't have, it's fine if you're single. If you're single, yes, you might, miss having a partner, but you don't experience the kind of toxicity that people experience when they don't format their marriages appropriately. Because one of the big contributors of towards mental ill-being, I won't call it mental disorder, because mental disorders are a complicated phenomenon. But basically, when you don't feel completely at ease, one of the reasons is that your relationship isn't going right. And there could be a variety of reasons for this. Obviously, what I'm going to say is very generic, because marriage is not something you can, talk about in the space of 40 minutes or so. And it may or may not apply to all of you. But I'm just hoping that it at least gives you some food for thought and sends you in a direction where you can explore your relationships to to a deeper level and make it more meaningful to work for you. Now, very often you find that today, certainly, people invest far more in the wedding than in their marriages. The wedding is a big tamasha, a lot of money is spent, and people romanticize the wedding so much that they think marriage is going to be a bed of roses afterwards. It rarely is. So, one of the things that we invariably get wrong is our perception of marriage. What is marriage? Many of us, in fact, most of us, think of marriage as a sacrament. It's solemnized in the presence of a higher being. Could be, in a place of worship, or you will always have some representative of the priestly class participating in the wedding ceremony. So we think it's a sacrament and we need to live up to that sacrament. And going along with that sacrament is the feeling that marriage is an institution. We all talk about the institution of marriage and how we need to live up to the goals and the ideals of that institution. But in this whole process, what we tend to forget is that marriage is neither of these. Marriage is essentially a relationship between two people. And like all relationships, there has to be emotional investment, there has to be mutuality, there has to be companionship, there has to be mutual respect, there has to be, a lot of comfort, transparency, and openness with each other. So I think it's important that we stop thinking of marriage as an institution and feel cowed down by it. Marriage is just a relationship, like we have relationships with our parents, we have relationships with our friends. Sometimes things work out well, sometimes they don't. But the bottom line is we persist nevertheless. Why do we persist? Because we've invested, because we care, not because we're in an institution. See, one of the reasons marriage came to be defined as an institution is that it's not a relationship by blood. In other words, you can't, dump your family. So you potentially can dump your partner. And to prevent that from happening, marriage started being recognized as an institution. And what happens when we think of it as an institution? We start playing roles. This is what a man should be like in a marriage. This is what a woman should be like in the marriage. Whether those gel with who we really are is secondary. What we think is this is what should be done. Very often I hear people say, we should be doing this, but we are not. The truth is, we shouldn't be doing anything that doesn't come naturally to us. And by that I mean that we need to work towards establishing a comfort with our partner so that whatever we do with our partners comes naturally to us, not because we're playing a role, not because this is what is expected of us. And that is what truly impacts upon our mental health because it breeds resentment. Many people say you have to compromise in a marriage. In my opinion, there's no place for compromise in a marriage because compromise, by definition, is doing something or not doing something that you don't want to do or not doing something that you want to do. Now, which means that you're unfulfilled. And as a result, you're always going to end up feeling a sense of resentment. And resentment plays havoc with your mind. And when, when you tend to, shall we say, get distracted by this, it impacts upon our work, it impacts upon our other relationships, it impacts upon our day-to-day activities, and it also impacts upon our physical and mental health. We become anxious, we start getting depressed, we wonder what's wrong with us, our self-esteem takes a beating. So all of this happens largely because, people tend to feel that they have to do certain things and compromise. As I said, I don't believe in compromise. But does that mean that we accept everything? No. What it means is we've got to learn to let go of some of the things which don't matter to us so much. We need to pick our battles. We need to make sure that we keep communicating so that we resolve differences, or we get to a platform where we agree to disagree, which is also fine. There's nothing wrong. There's no rule that says partners should be on the same page for everything. They don't need to be. But because we feel that we have to do this, we end up feeling uncomfortable and we end up feeling compromised. The second thing, so my way of looking at it is we start looking at marriage as a relationship and not an institution or a sacrament. We deal with it or we approach it with less anxiety, less fear, less discomfiture, but just as trying to get closer to each other. Now, what is the next factor that comes in the way of this? Sadly, today, the biggest pressure on the Indian marriage comes from the Indian family. Not because they're bad people, not because they want to cause harm, but because the expectations of the family are so high that it places a huge burden on the shoulders of the couple. We have the saying that it's not two people that get married, but two families do. I don't believe in that at all. Finally, marriage is between two people. That they function in a family is because of the fact that both of them also come from families. And we need to learn how to define boundaries between the marriage and the family. And today, since we live in a, in a time of great mobility, many people may not be living with their families, but their friends become their families. And believe me, friends can be as much of a mother-in-law as a mother-in-law is. And this reason for this is because, everybody has expectations. What has happened to our friendship? Now that you're married, you're not spending enough time with us. That sort of thing. So we need to learn to define boundaries with our families as well as friends. Now, as a nation, we don't do so well with boundaries because we are brought up to believe that, we shouldn't have boundaries with people we love or people we care for. But there's no truth to that. Because we have this mistaken notion that a boundary is like a Lakshman Rekha that says thus far no further. That's not a boundary. A boundary, as I see it, is, my telling you how much I can extend myself for you at this point of time. Tomorrow I may be able to extend myself more, because my family or my other requirements may have settled down. But at this time, I'm able to extend myself for you only this much. So please bear with me. Now, defining a boundary doesn't mean cutting off family or friends. Defining a boundary says, look, I need to prioritize my marriage for the time being until both of us feel completely secure in it. And so let's try and work towards that. And then when we are both securitized, then obviously the way we deal with our families is going to be quite different. Because today, one of the biggest conflicts bedeviling Indian marriages is the me and my family versus you and your family conflict. And this happens to all of us, some form or the other. Even if our families are not with us, there are always ersatz family members, some other people we look up to, or even the mental imagery of our parents or our other family members. So I think it's important that we need to move this conflict away from me and my family versus you and your family to we and our families. In other words, how do we strengthen our relationship so that together we deal with both our families and make them feel comfortable and make them feel like they are part of our lives without, sharing too many personal details of what's happening inside the marriage. Because today's tendency is many couples, when they have a row, when they have a big fight, first thing they do is to escalate to their parents. Now, this is something that I believe shouldn't be done because marriage has to be owned by both the partners. Yes, there are issues. Yes, we need to work around them. Let's find a way to work through them. And that's where commitment comes in. Many people feel that commitment is a terrible thing, How can I commit myself to somebody? I mean, I've known my parents for far longer than I've known my spouse. True. But commitment doesn't mean you're selling your soul to your spouse. Commitment really means I'm committed to not giving up, to try to work through all of these issues so that we can have a good quality of life. Rather than we settling for something suboptimal and then looking outside of the marriage for gratification. The next thing that we need to be aware of is that we need to learn how to manage our social spaces. See, we function in different spaces. There's a personal space, there's a marriage space, there is a primary family space, that is, people who are living with you or your immediate family members like parents whom you're interacting with on a regular basis, and your children. And then you have the extended family and friends space. And then you have the workspace, then you have the community space. Now, as an individual, we have to invest in each of these spaces because each of these spaces is collectively, responsible for our overall functioning as mentally healthy individuals. So, how do we do this? We really need to do this consciously because we need to be aware of how much, this is where boundaries come in. How much am I in a position to invest in this space? We tend to neglect the marriage space if the demands of the workspace are very high. Now, we need to then negotiate with the partner that this is not going to be forever, but at this time, maybe year ending or whatever, there is a lot of work, so we may not be able to spend much time with each other, whatever. Or A parent may fall sick. At this time, obviously, you'll have to invest more in your primary family space than in your marriage space or any of the other space. So you have to learn how to negotiate with the other spaces so that no space feels neglected. It's a tall order. But if you start doing it consciously and mindfully, you'll find that people are able to respond to that, particularly your partner. But the problem happens only when you don't have transparency with your partner. If you feel that one of the common things that many people feel is, my partner should understand. My question is why? If you haven't expressed it to them, how are they going to understand? You need to learn to express it, talk about it, negotiate it. And for this, communication becomes very important. Typically, our communications fail because we are very poor listeners. We don't really listen to what our partners say, or anybody else for that matter. Within the first 60 seconds of whatever our partners say, we have tuned out and we are thinking of how to respond to that. So we don't get the full, shall we say, impact of what the partner is saying and what they want. So we need to learn to become good listeners, and we need to learn not to express our needs in an accusatory tone. Typically, we start a sentence with you. You did this, you didn't do this. That's an accusatory statement. And believe me, it's going to be met with a defensive response. So the best way out of this is for us to learn how to express ourselves in a way that we're expressing our need. Start with I. I would like it if you did this for me. Not, you don't do this for me. Then your partner is free to say, at this time I can or this time I can't, but I will try and accommodate your needs to the extent I can. In other words, whenever we are discussing anything, we need to try and be as inclusive as possible. A boundary should not be an exclusive boundary where you exclude others, particularly your partner. You need to include them, share with them, explain the difficulty that you're having. And for that, we need transparency. One of the biggest issues today, at least in the first couple of years of any marriage, is financial opacity. That is, nobody is transparent about finances. Each person is, fearful that if they share the entire details, then the partner may take advantage of them. It has happened. I'm not saying it does not happen. But all the same, unless both partners are committed to being transparent, it's going to be very difficult to mount, or to even lay the groundwork for a happy, comfortable relationship. As a result, I've seen far too many marriages, far too many relationships break up, or many people may not be in an economic position to break up because very often many people say they find divorce too expensive. So then they have extramarital relationships, infidelity. Now, while I have no moral issue with infidelity and monogamy are not compatible. If you're in a monogamous relationship, by definition, it's an exclusive relationship. If you choose to have an extramarital partner, then obviously it's not compatible with monogamy. So I think what we need to do is to approach all of, how to deal with our partners as transparently as we can. And that transparency can happen only when both communicate with each other. I often ask people how much time they spend with each other. And I find that, you know, they would probably say we watch TV together. That's not spending time. Spending time connecting, sharing your day, downloading whatever happened during the day, talking through things, sharing without fear or favor. But today, we feel that if we share, we are vulnerable. Of course, we are vulnerable. Any relationship makes us vulnerable. But how do we get around that? Is for both partners to be vulnerable to each other. Because it's not a two-way, it's not a one-way street. It is a two-way thing. Obviously, one partner refuses to share, then he or she can't reasonably expect the other partner to also be sharing. Sharing is very important. Sharing your emotions, sharing your thoughts, sharing your ideas, sharing your plans, sharing your time. Because in the final analysis, marriage was, although originally when it came to exist, it was defined more in the context of, creating a family, having children, making them grow up, and making sure that they are exposed to two parents and get the benefit of both. But today, marriage has become about companionship. And when I use the term marriage, I'm not necessarily referring to it as a legal bond. It could be any committed relationship. Any relationship, whether it's a live-in, whether it's a relationship prior to live-in, whether it's a marriage, whatever way in which we choose to function in relationships, commitment is of primary consequence. Because unless we commit to hanging in there and doing our best to resolve it, and this has to be a bilateral commitment, it can't be unilateral. Because when it becomes unilateral, obviously marriage starts developing a shelf life. If only one person is doing all the extending. But when you speak to people who are having marital difficulties, you'll find that there are always two marriages in a marriage. Each of them feels that they are the only ones doing the extending. They are the ones taking the trouble, but the partner doesn't seem interested. I don't think this is always accurate, but I think we need to understand in what way our partner feels unfulfilled. So, which means we need to understand our expectations. Because an issue which constantly comes in the way of a marriage is unstated expectations. Now, I might expect that my partner be like my parent, but I don't state it. Not because I don't want to state it, but because I haven't realized it myself. And I think marriage, therefore, is a wonderful institution. I wouldn't call it institution, a wonderful space in which you can start a process of introspection to understand yourself better. I know that people who have, any kind of mental health issues, diagnosable mental health issues, they approach things, they have to approach marriage or any relationships with slight difference. And that is not my area of expertise, unfortunately. But I will be happy if anybody has questions in that area to be able to share with you how I think that particular bottleneck can be overcome. Because when we have a mental health issue and when we have, a partner who's not just a partner but also a carer, then they start playing multiple roles and role definitions start getting blurred. But there are ways in which these can be dealt with and tackled as well. So I think if we consider what I have said, if we start looking at marriage different, with a slightly different perspective, not as an institution, not as a sacrament, but as a relationship. Then I guess we can, define comfortable boundaries, inclusive boundaries, have good equations with other social spaces, but at the same time, not sacrifice our marriage space, because that's where things start getting very hairy. When we sacrifice a marriage space and the partner doesn't have the bandwidth. Now, obviously, when people have personality clashes or something, some baggage which they're not aware of, which keeps on impacting upon their marriage, and that's a time when you should consider seeking couple therapy. Couple therapy is not, as is popularly believed, advice that is given by a therapist. It's not a prescriptive process at all. I mean, you are adults. Only you know what you can do, what you can't do. Couple therapy helps you by understanding the dynamics of your relationship so that both of you can have or make considered choices. Not just, either choose to martyr yourself or choose to run away from the relationship. So even though, one of the questions that many people ask me is, an arranged marriage, does it have greater longevity than, say, a love marriage? Frankly, in my experience, how you choose your partner doesn't matter at all. It's what you put into the marriage that matters. There are some people who feel that they simply cannot get their heads around an arranged marriage phenomenon, which is okay. Then they want to choose their partners. It's okay. But whatever happens, merely because you've known your partner for a while, doesn't mean that your marriage is going to be very much better. What it means is that if you've known your partner for a while, that you will still find after you get married that there are lots of things that you haven't known about them. And that's largely because people bring into the marriage, once the wedding is done, they bring into it this institutionalized concept. They start playing roles, have expectations. So I think that we need to try and explore how we can tweak our mindset so that we can, move forward in a much more substantive manner. Now, I'm not going to go on droning about this. I would be very happy to respond to any questions that you may ask.
Next, Dr. Nagaswami. Okay, so the very first question that we got towards the beginning of your talk was, one second, sorry. I think we'll get to that one next. Somebody asked, how does equality between partners affect the relationship? So I asked the person asking the question, this is Ravindranath, if they could elaborate on what they meant by equality. I think maybe you could talk about the different kinds of equality in a relationship.
See, equality is something that's, more in your head. Equality is, there will never be complete financial equality because both partners will have either come from different financial backgrounds or, their earnings may not necessarily match each other. They may not be total physical equality because one person may be physically stronger than the other. But as I understand it, equality in a marriage is that each of you feels that you have equal rights and equal responsibilities. In other words, when we own something, it is a joint property. When you buy a house in joint names, It's a joint property. It doesn't mean that I only have the right over it. I also have a responsibility over
If I may, they've elaborated a little bit.
it. Mhm.
They said economic, emotional, hierarchical, and any other aspect that you can think of. What I mean is not having one partner subservient to the other.
See, I'll put it this way. That's really happenstance, economic. It really depends on the kind of job you're doing. But merely because one person has a greater capacity for economic input, it does not therefore make them superior. Because finally, it is sharing. It can't be my money, your money. It has to be our money. And if we use this institutional mindset, then we start approaching it from I. What we need to do is to approach it from the we mindset. Now, if we think of marriage as a relationship, there is no hierarchy in a marriage. It is not as if one person is the boss of the house. This is also a common fallacy that one person has to have the casting vote. Not necessarily. It really depends on what your strengths are. For example, if one person is better at, say, managing investments, then obviously they'll do it. If another person is better at, planning, say vacations, then they do it. Another person is better at budgeting, they do it. It's really a question of understanding each other's strengths and seeing how you can work synergistically. And believe me, the thing is, we do all of this at work. In office, when we function as a team, we are synergistic. But when it comes to the home, we find it harder to be synergistic because we don't see our partners as part of the team. We think that, one should be inferior, the other should be superior. Not at all necessary. So hierarchically, I would say equality comes the minute you get married. There has to be a complete breakdown of the hierarchy. The third, you said emotionally. See, obviously, some people are more in touch with their emotions than are others. Traditionally, men are not trained to be in touch with their emotions, although that's undergoing a sea change nowadays. And women are more in touch with their emotions. Now, merely because somebody is more in touch with their emotions does not give them an upper hand. Or the other partner is stoic doesn't give them an upper hand either. It basically means that we learn from each other. The person who's not in touch with their emotions learns how to get in touch with theirs. And the person who's easily in touch with their emotions learns how to manage their emotions from the partner. That's what I meant when I said teamwork. It's a give and take. We learn from each other. And that's where equality really begins.
Okay, so this is now a little bit of a controversial question, in my opinion.
Mhm.
But one of the first questions we got was, are divorces going up due to the economic freedom of women?
Well, let me put it this way. It has nothing to do with economic freedom of women. It has to do with women feeling more comfortable. Sorry?
Please go
Women,
ahead, because just somebody who was not on mute.
yeah. It's about women feeling more empowered generally. In other words, women aren't going to accept any old reality, but they would like to be treated with respect. Now, this is something that many men haven't been taught how to. So, as a result, they perceive that it's because she is economically empowered that she goes in for a divorce. I can tell you this much, most divorces are not initiated by women. it's roughly equal as to who initiates a divorce proceeding. So it's not as if economic, should we say, empowerment of women has made them feel that they can walk away at any time. Yes, they don't accept the kind of, patriarchy that their mothers or their grandmothers did. But I wouldn't say that this is the reason for divorces having gone up. I would say generically the reason, I'm not even sure whether the divorce rate has gone up. If you really look at the data, and I've looked through a lot of data of the Indian census, of our divorce courts, what I found, and also from personal experience, with my and professional experience, I found that in the past they were not called divorces, but it was not uncommon for one parent to stay with one child and the other parent to stay with the other child. These are all emotional divorces, but they've not been formalized. Because if they get formalized, the entire family structure would collapse because our whole economy was built around the integrity of the family. So as a result, people apparently stayed together, but not necessarily, in a fulfilled or fulfilling manner. But today, people are more willing to make that legal. And if they make it legal, then it appears in the divorce rates. So I would say that the rates of emotional divorce have not changed substantively. The rates of legal divorce, yes.
Thanks so much. So before we move on to the last two questions that we have about 10 minutes or so left. I
Okay.
wanted to talk to you about something that we haven't really covered in this talk, and it's perhaps a reason to bring you back another time, which is the role of sexual compatibility and physical intimacy in the space of a marriage, because that also has a very large place to play. So, if you could just speak very briefly about what you might think about that, or what could be helpful for people.
See, sexual compatibility, when you use that term, you define that some people are sexually incompatible. In theory, no. It's mostly in the head. And I agree with you, sexual intimacy is a very important part of marriage because it's what binds two people together. And when I say this, I'm not just talking about, just a biological act. When two people are close to each other and they have sex, it becomes making love. So love making is more important than just having mindless sex. Mindless sex, you can have occasionally, but when two people are close to each other, then you find that, uh, there is much greater closeness, enhances the intimacy, enhances the companionship. So yes, sexual issues are rife in our country. And most of the sexual issues come from inadequate sexual information. We get our sex
Great. So we're
education.
definitely bringing you back for a session on this, or maybe another expert,
I think
because I
another
think this is
expert
a
would be better.
okay. You can recommend someone. So we have two questions that deal with, as you said, it's not your area of expertise, but you would welcome questions on it, which is the issues of mental health in a marriage. So Satish asks, shall one think of marriage? I think how shall one is what he meant. How shall one think of marriage of their loved one suffering from mental illness? Whether it will be successful? What precautions should one take so that marriage of a person with mental illness would be successful? Related to this is what would you suggest to a person of mental health issues before marriage?
A person with mental health issues.
Somebody who's suffering from a condition before marriage.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then the first question was about,
Yeah, I got that.
I think you got that.
So, see, the way I see it is this, marriage is not essential to life. Companionship is. Now, our readiness and our capability of getting into marriage boils down to two things. One is, do we have an understanding of what marriage is going to do for us or do to us? Or do we only have a romanticized vision of it? And the second thing is, are we capable emotionally of relating, with comfort to our partners? Now, that recommendation, I would say, has to be made by a treating psychiatrist. See, we have this fallacious belief in us, in our culture, that once you get married, everything will be over. And then when everything doesn't, so problems don't get solved, then they say have a child and everything will be settled. Neither of this is true because marriage is a stressful event. So an assessment has to be made whether the stress of marriage is going to add, greater burden to the mental ill health of the person concerned. And that determination, I think it's best to have a discussion with the treating psychiatrist or any other psychiatrist who can help you understand whether the individual suffering from the disorder will be more stressed or will be able to manage the expectations of a marital relationship. Now, that said, I think one of the first things, the most important thing, is to disclose completely before getting married. Another big reason for divorce, I didn't get into the reasons for divorce. Another big reason for divorce is what's called premarital non-disclosure, where partners are not disclosing, or partners' families are not disclosing any kind of health issues, whether mental or physical. And that produces huge, huge issues post-marriage. So I would say if we are contemplating marriage and the person feels that they are ready to get into marriage, if they feel that they, are emotionally in a position to deal with the issues that may arise during marriage, if the treating psychiatrist also agrees with that assessment and they don't have a romanticized view of marriage, and if they disclose to their potential partners, well, then I guess that's a good starting point.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Doug, because I think you really hit upon a very important part, which is the disclosure before marriage, because that also ties back to what Eklavya does when it comes to removing stigma. Because oftentimes it's the stigma ki log kya kahenge, and this like we can't admit that our son or daughter has some issue. Last question before we wrap up, and I don't know, this to me is a little bit on a lighter note, but it's a little serious as well, which is how do we convince our in laws that we are grown up and can stay alone and separate from living from them?
Well, first off, if you can convince your parents that you're grown up, then you can convince your in laws that you're grown up. But to do that, both you and the partner have to be on the same page. I personally feel I would recommend that every couple, certainly for the first 3 to 5 years of their lives, economics, uh, you know, permitting, should stay independently just to establish, how to make a home, how to do something together, how to do income taxes, how to run a home, how to manage your budget. Parents-in-law feel that, now they may be retired and they may be saying, We will take care of all this for you. We will look after your children. And you go on and work. You don't need to worry about anything. And they mean well. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that intention. But I think we need to help our in-laws understand that they can be doing so much more for themselves, even if they are retired. There are so many other activities available for older people today that they don't need to feel that this is the only role that they have left in their lives. It's not. So I think it's a question of both partners being on the same page, developing a strategy, and not feeling like you're cutting them away, but feeling like you're doing something to expand their lives and expand their opportunities. Well, that's a short answer. It's a complex question, but it's a
No, it's
short.
a very complex question, but that was a very helpful answer. So I think that brings us towards the end of our session. I'd just like to summarize in brief the kind of things that we covered today, the topics that we did. Viewing marriage instead of as an institution or a sacrament vis-a-vis a relationship or a partnership, setting boundaries, the different kind of spaces that one encounters during a relationship or a marriage, the personal, the immediate, the extended family, the societal, which includes the workspace, the importance of listening to our partners when we are having a row or just in general, um, transparency, disclosure. That comes back to the mental health issue that we just talked about, but also in general, how are you feeling today, right? That which leads to communication, the idea that it's okay to be vulnerable. And I think we touched upon this on various different issues, including last but not least sexuality, because in a sexual situation where you're physically intimate with somebody, you are the most vulnerable I think that you can ever be. And then that led us to expectations, and expectations can often be a downside because you kept saying romanticization. Marriage and relationships can be romantic, but they shouldn't be romanticized. And there is a big difference between the two of them. There's a difference between expecting something of your partner which is not realistic, I believe, is what we were talking about, or yourself in that matter. And thank you, Dr. Vijay Nagaswami, for your talk. I'm sure that we will have a couple of follow-up questions, which I will send your way via email from our groups. I would like to now hand over to Manjari in case there are any announcements on behalf of Eklavya, and then we can conclude the session. But thank you so much, Doc.
Thank you.
Thank you, doctor, for such an insightful, session. And we had these questions on mind every now and then, but I think you have given us this complete picture. We'll definitely think about it, and we would definitely like you to come to our this Eklavya's platform to give us another session. So thank you very much, doctor. Nothing from my side. This video will be available on Eklavya Foundation for Mental Health YouTube channel. So we will forward this video to you in case some of your patients who have not joined this session, you can just forward it to them.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.